Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Janine Mason. I'm the Executive Director and founder of the Fieldstone Leadership Network San Diego, and I'm pleased to welcome you today to a FORTIFY webinar, Exercising Good Governance in Uncertain Times. And good governance is always important, but especially in uncertain times, and we're pleased to be able to join with the Nonprofit Institute at the University of San Diego in presenting this webinar to you today. Both of our organizations are committed to supporting nonprofit leaders as they lead their organizations in San Diego. And so COVID-19 has presented us with a unique opportunity to come together and to bring some learning opportunities, both about organizational development, but also your personal well-being. And so on Tuesdays of each week, we generally do a webinar that is focused on organizational leadership. And then on Fridays, we have a webinar that is focused on your personal well-being. And this Friday, we will be meeting at noon on Zoom with Dr. Zachary Green to explore the concept of personal and professional resiliency. So if you're able to join us for that gathering on Friday at noon, please feel free to do so. FORTIFY aims to strengthen nonprofit leadership, well-being, and sustainability of both our nonprofit leaders and our organizations. And this online opportunity provides an opportunity for us to gather together and, my slides are not moving, to learn together in response to the demands of COVID-19. To make the most of our time together today, I want to just share some helpful hints with you. If you're having any technical difficulties whatsoever, please feel free to email Cynthia Fernandez. You'll see her email on our screen. You can also use the chat box to communicate with her. Everyone on our call today is muted. If you do have questions while we're moving along through the presentation, feel free to use the question and answer box. You'll find that at the bottom of your screen. And if you have resources that you would like to share with the community, please feel free to add those in the chat, and we will collect those after the webinar is over. Today, we will stay on the call for about 10 minutes after 1, unless you have questions that haven't gotten answered during our 1-hour time together today. We will stay on for extended time so that we're able to get to all of your questions. We are recording this webinar, and it will be available on both the Fieldstone Leadership San Diego website and the Nonprofit Institute website, along with any of the resources that we refer to or we collect as we go through our time together today. So FORTIFY was crafted in response to the capacity building needs that were communicated by the San Diego nonprofit sector to the Nonprofit Institute through the survey. Hopefully you've all participated in the survey. The survey has been put out to the community twice, once within the first few days of the stay-at-home orders, and then again just within the last 2 weeks. And so these are, you'll see on the screen, the things that people said were the most important to them, and this is how we crafted the FORTIFY series. So with that, you'll see that guidance to board of directors, almost half of the people who participated in the survey said that that was of great importance to them. And so I'm really pleased today to be able to present to you Lynn Corbett. Lynn is a PhD candidate at the University of San Diego, and I first met him when he was in that capacity, and since that time he has moved in to a director position at the Institute, and he leads the governance and community programming for the Nonprofit Institute. I've had an opportunity to work with a board that I sit on, and we brought in Lynn as a consultant, and I can tell you he's highly skilled and has a great deal of wisdom on good governance. So I'm very excited to present him to you today and to introduce him and to spend the next hour learning with Lynn. So with that, I want to hand it over to Lynn.
All right, well, thank you, Janine, and welcome everyone. I'm excited about spending time with you. For those of you who I know, it's nice to see you. For those of you who don't know, I really look forward to spending this time together with you. But in addition to that, I look forward to future opportunities to kind of hang out with you all as a group. So with that being said, let me share my screen here. Okay. Okay, Cynthia, are you seeing anything at all? No.
Yeah, Lynn, you can just push the champagne glass on the bottom,
Champagne glass on the bottom.
the very bottom, but or go full screen, or begin slideshow.
Okay. I'm sorry, just one.
While you're working on that, Lynn, I'll just, this is Laura Dietrich. I'm the Associate Director of the Nonprofit Institute. I will tell you all that our most recent survey results that Janine was referring to are coming out in maybe later today, probably tomorrow morning. But what I think is really interesting on there is we asked organizations how supported they felt by their boards of directors. And, you know, a fair amount of people told us they felt supported, but 27%, nearly a third, informed us that they were feeling not at all supported or supported at least to some extent. And we believe that now more than ever, especially with organizations downsizing and stretching to full capacity, that they that board governance and good governance is critical to what we are hoping to, you know, organizations need that guidepost when we're really operating through ambiguity. So this presentation today responds to the desire of the organizations and aims to elevate governance to a point that's you know, that is so that's so needed right now. Lynn, are you having technical difficulties?
Just a little bit, because it says when I try and share it does not want me to share, but we're figuring this out right now.
Okay.
We're able to see your screen, Lynn. So if it helps for you to go through it with the way that it looks right now.
Right there, hit that.
There you
There
go.
you go.
Perfect.
Okay. Let's see. So you're saying you can see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. And for those of you who know of a good service to help me learn this stuff, please make sure you email me. Again, my name is Lynn Corbett. Thank you for pausing or being with me in a second here. I'm excited about not only governance for all of you that know me, but excited about organizations, organizational development, and how we as a group lead and are forced to sometimes lead with in most of the unusual circumstances. So let me change this here. We wanted to just talk about a reminder. We talked about FORTIFY. It's on our website just like this. I'm not going to go through them, but I want to let you know that we are committed to making sure that the organizations as a whole, everyone has the opportunity to see the different things that we have going on through this process. Often at times people ask me what resources do they use. You, of course, will have copies of all these slides and this will be recorded, but you have the opportunity to also look at some of these organizations that I go to. Like, for example, the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits is an organization that I go to often to look at my stuff. You know, Board Source, of course, has a lot more information right now, particularly in this time, and they all have links to other resources. And I do want to say that most of the organizations that do charge a fee for service, they are waiving their fee right now and allowing a lot more of their material to be provided for you free of charge. So very excited about that. You know, the word governance comes from the Greek word Kebernon, which is really to steer. And as you can imagine, a boat like this is often difficult to steer, but also it takes time, right? It takes time to shift responsibilities. And in something like this, there's so many different sails. It really takes everybody working in a different way to really try and make sure that we're coming together to really get into the direction that we want or get to the place that we want to be. With that being said, I want to say, often at times people are saying to a certain extent that in this time, we're all coming together and this is great. Well, from a governance perspective, it's incredible to see organizations come together. But there's a part there that people are forgetting about. If we did not have good communication in our board, all of a sudden now it's not good communication, right? So some of those challenges that were sometimes preventing us from really taking the next level up to exceptional governance are still present. And we have to be mindful of that. Where are we as an organization? What were some of those challenges that we had? If we had a problem with communicating, how do we over communicate? How do we make sure that communication is happening? And what do we need to do to put in place during these times? Because the governance potholes and or pitfalls are still remaining, right? So how do we make sure that we can see them and identify them so that we can move forward and look in a way of a more of a strategic nature? So I always think it's important to make sure that we talk about these three modes of governance: generative, strategic, and fiduciary, right? From the book, Governance as Leadership. This is the model that we adhere to when we talk governance at University of San Diego, the Nonprofit Institute. We will talk about operating in these three modes. Many of you have heard this stuff, but I want to make sure that it's put in the light of the work that we're going through right now. So that first nerd is really fiduciary, right? Legal compliance, fiscal accountability, operational oversight. These key questions are, can we afford it? What's the opportunity cost? Is the budget balanced? Is it legal? Is it ethical? Right? And whereas the strategic is like forecasting in the future. Although we can't see around this curve, there are many people that depend on us to see around the curve. So what are we, how do we evaluating outcomes, and how do we creating a roadmap of how to achieve goals? Is our business model viable? What are the core competency? What trends and factors should we consider? So these are things that from a strategic nature, what are we looking at? So we talked about fiduciary, we talked about strategic. And then the final one is this generative, where we want to spend most of our time, embracing the wisdom that we've learned, discovering insight, deciding what to decide, and asking the question, of course, the question why. And then some of those key questions are, how can we reframe this issue? How do we serve? And are we relevant? So really looking at this from a generative perspective. So just keep that in mind as we start looking through what are some ways that we can kind of figure this out. Let me just change my view for a second here. Oops, sorry. Okay. I want to make sure, what is it that you see now? Cynthia, I'm sorry. So you guys can still see clearly?
We see your screen.
Yeah.
But we also are now getting word to text.
Oh, okay, but you don't see my
caption.
Okay, but you don't see my my presenter notes?
Not anymore.
Okay, perfect. Get rid of those. Okay, so there's three ways that I'm going to phrase this, and I put them in these words so that we can remember them and recall them. So the first one is that these three times in exercising good governance. The first one is investigate. The second one is communicate, and then the last one is activate. So figuring out what is it that we need to do in these times. So I'll go through each one of these, and then I'll have some key questions throughout for you and your board to answer. And then you can put stuff in the chat. I don't mind answering them as we're going, but also at the end, we'll have the opportunity to talk. So the first one, if we look at from a investigate standpoint, so if we are jumping into that and figuring out what are we have to investigate and why are we going out there, the first thing is, I think it's important to keep abreast of the needs of the sector and the population. When we investigate what's going on, often at times is when we focus internally alone, but there are opportunities out there if we can keep an eye on not our organization, the sector, but also our population served. So example, sometimes arts and culture information comes out specifically. Homeless advocates comes out specifically. So we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on the sector, but also our specific population. Explore all options to immediately mitigate the financial impact. Bless you. So what happens is that sometimes people are so quick to make this first decision, that they're not really thinking about all the options immediately. So how do we investigate? One is looking at what other organizations are doing. And two is put some scenarios out there, scenario planning and figuring out, well, if this happens, then what? A lot of times people are immediately saying that we need to go here and this needs to happen immediately. And they're not taking the time to think through that. Some of these decisions that you have to make, they may be inevitable, but a lot of times it's our responsibility to make sure that we are following from a specific standpoint and understand clearly what all of our options are. And not acknowledge where you are as a board and organization. You know, many of us at different places within the organization, different places within our life cycle of an organization, to figure out what is it that we can achieve with where we are as a board and where we are as an organization. All right. And then identify some of the essential things your organization needs to keep doing, which is stuff you know already, but how do you put that down and then investigate it? And then be clear the stakes, the stakes are high. We realize that. And the dangers are real. We realize that also. So this is serious. Every decision you make is going to be of the utmost urgency. So it requires a sense of urgency. So, you know, you have to show up and you have to act with a sense of urgency. I will say this, I was, when we were talking to a couple of board members, and they had mentioned that there was an ED who had said, you know, I don't want to think about this right now. And in the next couple of weeks, I'm sure it'll work itself out, right? And that's the fear that we're all facing, like, hey, this can't last for this long. But it's our responsibility to kind of like look at this and figure out and try and look at what's going to be a little bit different out there. I was on the ground when 9/11 happened. I was right there when I looked up into the sky and I saw the planes crashing, and immediately went into reaction mode and was able to say, okay, I have program, I'm an executive director. I have all of this stuff going on. What do I have to do? There were people that I knew that were calling me and saying, hey, let's go up to this building so we can see it clearer. And I jumped in and realized a sense of urgency right away. We're able to contact all of our people, get an idea of where we're going. So when the phones died, I felt comfortable that I had that contact. So what is the, again, we can't compare two significant events, but we can compare the sense of urgency and how we tackle issues so we can use it as a learning opportunity. And which goes into my next point, is that we have to take on this learning spirit. That I don't want to hear anybody who says, oh, I've been through this before, because it's never been like this before. And it's never been, although your organization may have been, but you haven't gone through it at the same time that your staff are going through it, the world is going through it. So how are we taking this on as a learning organization? There's three types of these organizations, like the hibernators, people are going to wait back, the responders who are going to say, hey, this is what I can do. And then the hybrids who are like, hey, I can do some things, I can't do others. I was just on a call with 5 small and emerging nonprofits that we're working with, and all of them had said, yes, we're hybrids. We are doing it as much as we can right now. So things are not as changed, but we realize that people need us in a certain way. I felt very impressed by that and encouraged that there's still ways that people can meet the needs, even if they're fully a volunteer-driven organization and an organization that has staff and needs space. They still are figuring out opportunities to do that. In addition to that, investigate, what I've done is, and I often do this, I put questions together. So for each of these categories, I put questions together that you can ask your groups, that you can talk about, that you can go back and say, hey, is this what we're thinking about or not? I won't read all of these, but they are for you and your groups to say, am I asking ourselves this question? So what is the tone of our organization and its response? Like, are we setting the correct tone, right? I think that this is a time for true leaders and true leadership. Right? You will be judged how you respond. I was working with the church, and the church said, hey, we're concerned about the way people are responding to us because, we have needs right now and people aren't coming to us. I said, that's a very valid point. So the people that you serve, how are you checking on their needs? So actually, as a church, they were not checking on the people they serve needs. They were spending more time about, well, who can help them, what's going on? So what I'm saying here is that this will be the true time. People want people to help them in times when they need to. And this is really going to define your organization, who you are, how you react. All right. Does it align with your core values of your organization? Right. Are we thinking about the totality of what's going on? Right. Our board members, they have the potential of going through stuff. They may know somebody who's going through it. They may fall ill themselves. Right? So are we acting, we keep saying that we're all in this together. Are we acting like we're all in this together? right? And as a board member, as a board at a boardroom, that's where some of these hard conversations have to happen, right? So the question here is, people are like, well, we need money, we need money. Often at times, yes, money is important, it's here, but also figuring out, well, what is your case? Like, why should somebody give to your organization? But also, what is it that specifically that you need, right? Why is it so important during this time to give your organization money, right? And be clear about that, right? Who does your organization work with? So you can make sure that we're at least touching base with them, right? So what does it mean? Some of this stuff is stuff that executive directors do and that work is being continued. But some of this stuff is where I, as a board member, can jump in there and say, what is it that I can do? I've mapped some of our stakeholders. I've did some research. I can make phone calls. I can reach out to some of our supporters. So, and then I can also reiterate why this is important to us. And that's where it is. So the first one was investigate, try and build my case. What are my needs? Identifying what my needs are specifically. Laura was on a call with me earlier, and she said, well, this is the best time to get rid of a program that you might have wanted to get rid of for quite a long time ago, because this gives you that opportunity. And I thought it was funny. I also thought it was a way to look at it from an investigative standpoint is that if we've been pouring money or our time in this program, is this something that we're going to continue to do? Is this something in this time where we need to save that money and save that resources? People often talk the time is now is the time to save your resources. Are you looking at that? Someone said, well, we promised somebody that it was about that time they were going to get a position change, and we think that we should, hold our word. Well, I believe that that's important to make sure you be a man or a woman of your word and your organization supports. But I also believe that in times like this, in emergencies like this, that you have to figure out what are we doing and how are we conserving in a way that really means that we have opportunities and the resources to protect our staff and our organization in the future. And that could be done a number of different ways. So the question is that the second part of it is this communication. All right. People often at times are saying, well, everybody knows what's going on. I'm encouraging you to own the narrative, seize the narrative at the outset. Like, what is your narrative? What are you trying to make sure people are understanding about your organization and what your organization is going through right now? Many of you may or may not have a communications plan. What is our communications plan going to be for right now? Communicate through advocacy. Am I nonprofit support and policy change? We've been working with institutions who realize when small businesses, we're talking about small business, we're also talking about nonprofits, smaller nonprofits who need the same level of support. So we've been working with the Small Business Association and other partners to ensure that nonprofits are accessing these resources from the government, but also that they are getting the resources that they need in a number of different ways. So, so we have those opportunities, and you can reach out to us and we can talk to you about ways that we can support you. Boards and leadership must work together, how to best to communicate to their stakeholders. Not everyone needs the same type of communication. So some people are saying, hey, I need a newsletter. I want a newsletter, send our newsletter out. Some people need that one-on-one phone call. If you have somebody who's been supportive of yours for a long time, many of these organizations are repurposing their funds. They're figuring out different ways, that even foundations that they can give differently. Some of the donors are saying, hey, I understand what you're going through. Here it is now. But my point here is that you have to know who you're going to communicate to. You have to make sure that every stakeholder that's a stakeholder that we come out of this, that they're still stakeholders, that they still know that you are there for them and that you're supporting them and that you need their support, because this is a partnership. How do we make sure that we're communicating? Another good role for board members, as long as you understand your talking points. We want that same message to go out even more as this time as ever, to be consistent in your messaging. We want to communicate also through our advocacy again, and figuring out ways that what are some things that we're going to do as an organization, and what do we want people to know that we're doing. So what are we doing, and what do we want people to know that we're doing? How do we make sure we devise a plan and a consistent strategy so that we're talking the right talk, everybody's saying the right thing? How do we have an open dialogue with our funders, continue to have this discussion, developing this case for support? And then often at times, don't stop fundraising. There are some people who are, they're very, very support, getting a lot of support, and this is helpful to this time, but there's others that are trying to figure out, well, what should we do, what shouldn't we do? And I'm saying that, you know, you still have to look at your fundraising opportunities, you still have to kind of like shift your thinking about them. There are ways that you can partner with other organizations. I was talking to somebody this morning who they are partnering on a joint space. Two different organizations serving similar needs that are partnering on a joint space and figuring out what are some ways that they could, as this turns around, as they begin to open, what space are they going to have? Continue to make those connections, again, advocate and be an ambassador. How do you put your ambassador hat on? There are people who are, I was coaching with somebody and they said, you know, before I give up, you know, and have to let go all of my key staff members, I will give up our building that we have. So we're going to give up our offices before that. And they're saying to themselves is that, first of all, we don't know what's going to happen after this. Second of all, the building, we don't use it for services. We use it more for staffing. The building itself will not make us money in the long run. It's our staff that we need to rely on. It's our people that we need to rely on. Thinking about it a different way, taking that hat off and saying, what is it important and what do we need, right? Well, a lot of times what people do is they say in this time, a lot of the fund support, they get cut right away. And they say, well, you know, we need service, we need direct service. We may or may not need the fundraising staff. We may not need the communication staff. I will say that the fundraising staff and the communication staff, often at times I've talked to executive directors and board members who regret that to a certain extent. Because what happens is now they're saying, well, who's communicating to our funders, right? So they have to feel like they have to start building a fundraising machine again. And they feel like they're off the mark because they didn't have someone who can concentrate on that. Same thing with communications, figuring out how do we communicate and continue to communicate, and who's gonna take that role. We all know that it needs to happen. And the only thing that I'm encouraging you to do is to think first and figure out what is gonna be the long-term implications of this. And if the implications are as long as we think that they may or may not be, then at least we can ask ourselves questions through that. And that's what it is. It's really asking the key questions. I think it's Thoreau that says a man or a woman should be known by their questions and not by their answers. So the point here is that what are the questions that we are asking ourselves and how do we make sure that that's coming forth? So for my communication section, which is again, investigate, communicate, I have a communications questions here for you. So the one here is that, do you have a communications plan in general for our key stakeholders? How and how often do we need to communicate with our staff, our volunteers, our board? If we're talking about advocating, what are we advocating for, right? What messages are we trying to relay? How do we communicate our needs, right? How do we adjust our strategies that we do have in place, right? These are some of the basics, some of the stuff that we have right now that we're going to really look at. But the point here is that each individual group, each individual person, how are we reaching out to them? We know this is time consuming, but we know that this is also an opportunity for boards to really look at the future of their organization by making sure that they're building a trail of support and or a group of support. The last one that, and before I get to the last one, if anybody wants to hop in, if there's anything in the message board I can respond to. Okay, I'll keep going on here. So the last one here is the last of my three is after investigate, communicate, and the last one is activate. Like, how do we activate? How do we take it with the sense of urgency that I spoke about? What is the call to action that we really want people to do? So first one is, you know, be the expert because you are. Right? People often at times are saying, well, I don't know what's going on here, what's going on there. A lot of times people don't know, right? So we relying on you as experts, you as doing your job. I can't come in and do that work that you're doing. I don't have the experience that your board has. I don't know your stakeholders. Be the expert because you are. Anticipate a changed future, right? So when I was working for a city government and I was sitting at the table with the mayor, city council, and directors, and we're talking about 2008, right around the recession time, and we're talking about how are we going to make the budget? What are we going to do? Often at times there were people at the table, some were police, some were fire, in different organizations. What they found a year into it, they were saying we need to get our staffing numbers in the police department or the fire department. We need to get them back to where they were. And it was the only thing in their mind was getting it back to where they were. Now, some of them were the union, some of them were different groups advocating for that. But I said to myself, I said, but crime is down. If crime is down, if everything that we're doing is down, what can we do differently? So they were giving away some of the city buildings for $1 for 3 years, $1 for 10 years, and letting nonprofits take them over. So there were all of these creative things that were happening. And I'd say that, well, maybe it's not about just getting numbers to where they were, but it's anticipating that the future is going to change. The way we do things is going to change, and we have data to support it, right? Crime being down, activities being up, that building that was not being used as much, being used 3 times as much as it was. So how creative are we committing? How do we advocate for ideas and programs like that from a government perspective? There is a special place for the board chair in this whole thing. You know, the board chair is usually also the sounding board. The board chair is the one that gets an idea of what else is going on. Also having more direct contact with the executive director, understanding what people are going through. So the CEO definitely has a key role throughout, not the CEO definitely has a key role, but the board chair has a key role in here to keep the pulse of what's going on, right? So how do we also keep the mission and values at the center, right? If we're gonna do this, how does this tie into our mission? How does this speak to our values, right? How do we address and think about our liquidity needs right now and in the future? And what does that mean? Do I need to get some other people in there to help us figure this out, right? Delegate more to the executive committee. Often at times that people are saying, hey, this is a time to delegate more to them because they may or may not be meeting more often. They may or may not need to make sure they're making decisions quicker. So what are some things that we can do that? So often at times people are putting together a task force, right? Something that's not going to be a permanent part of the board, but it'd be a task force that can work on something specific that we can provide help and support in this one area, right? This one also is important, the foundations. I've spoken to some foundation executives and they have some great plans and they have some great strategies. And, but I think a lot of them also at times want to know what specifically people need help with. All right? Their ideas and suggestions are incredible, but they want to know what other information that you can give us to support that. How do you do that? A lot of times it's still maintaining relationships, giving an update on where you all are and what you're doing and how this is working, but then also what are your ongoing or anticipated ongoing needs. So the other thing when we talk about boards and we talk about forming these task forces, there's also this thing about what expertise, professional expertise, diverse perspective might we need right now to provide us a certain level of insight. So it doesn't mean that you have to say, okay, people, we're going to join. I want to have all these new board members come on. But it's saying that, hey, if I need somebody with the financial acumen that's needed for us right now, how do we get them into our room? How do we get them into our conversation? How do we get them into a committee? And it doesn't mean that they need to be a full board member, but our bylaws may or may not be changed, but they could be a member of a committee. They can be a support, right? So identify how someone can support you. Again, through your activities, people may say, this is how we've identified our level of support, but next week things change. So how do we keep changing as things change? I often at times ask people, if you had $10,000 today, what would you do with it? Somebody automatically says, we're gonna use it to pay this. But if you answer that quickly, then you haven't thought hard enough, right? Figuring out what is it that you need. If you were to get it, how would you go about doing it, right? A lot of times our attention is on a certain area and we're gonna keep it on that certain area. So to figure out what are some things that we can do, right? Don't try and solve today's problems with yesterday's solutions, right? That it happened there, this is what we've done before, this is the way we've always done it. And really looking at the future and saying, this is, what are some things that we're looking at with today's solutions? And I was talking to someone recently about an organization that's been around for quite some time, right? And they're changing a lot of things. They say, hey, it's been around for so long, but we're really changing some real specific things that make it more powerful for them. And that's just like, great. And even though you feel like a lot of the stuff is not so good and it may or may not be the best way, but 40 years of work, 40 years of changing lives. So in today's world, they can change it a little bit differently, but also thinking about how is our organization going to be impacted, and how do we have this post-crisis thinking in mind? What's going to happen after this changes? What's going to happen? Where are we? Right? So there's a time for post-crisis thinking. There's a time right now for jotting down information. There's a time right now to saying, how did we get here? What can we do differently? But there's also a time for saying, hey, let's kind of think about this through this lens so that we have an idea of what the future, and it's part of our thought process. Here are some key questions for you. And again, I'll have these questions to you. And if I missed a comma or a period, I'll make sure I correct those and get these to you also. But this is something that's continually evolving with every conversation I have. So the activating key questions here is, where's the opportunity? How did the organization and board culture exacerbate the situation? So really thinking back to that whole, hey, we were here and this is what challenges we faced as a board, they're not going away. So what are the culture and how did it change the situation? How could we have been more prepared? How as an organization could we have been more prepared through this crisis? You know, where are we on our life cycle? Are we at a stage in our life cycle where we need to be renewing? Is it forcing us to renew as an organization? So thinking about that, and there's if you look up nonprofit organizational life cycles, you'll be able to find a little bit more information on how to identify that. So who can we partner with, and when can or should we tap into our reserves? Many a times people were saying, well, it's a rainy day fund. It's only drizzling outside, so maybe we shouldn't dip into it. When should you? No one really can answer that, but except for you. But if any time is a time for it, and for those of you who are starting or were about to start some of your reserves process, that may still be something that you keep in mind. Maybe it's so important that we still keep putting our reserves or talking about making a rainy day fund so that we're still focused on that, and that's how important it is to us. What policies need to change? How do our bylaws need to be updated? How do they need to be updated now? So if our meetings say no virtual meetings, our bylaws say no virtual meetings, how do we need to change that now so that our bylaws reflect what we're doing, right? And with that virtual meeting, what are the expectations? Keeping in mind that there are people who they're doing Zoom meetings all day long, so maybe they don't want to sit on a Zoom meeting for a 4-hour board meeting. Someone told me they had a 4-hour Zoom board meeting. That is exhausting. Right? So what are we doing? How do we change things to make it more, does it work better for our organization and for our board? And are there new services or delivery models that we need to start thinking about now? Other things that we need to start thinking about us doing to stop right now? And looking at that in a way to figure out, like, what are some of our areas that need to take a back seat for now? And then also looking at is what evaluation systems are we using to make that decision? Are we making that decision based on what we're hearing ourselves? Are we making that decision because somebody told one of our board members that? Or is it's really literally a board member's idea? And if it's a board member's idea, how do we go back and figure out, is this going to be viable? Is it something that we could look at truly and say, this is the way to carry information forth? So what is the tool that we're going to use to make these decisions? What are the tools and the data that we need to evaluate this? A couple of ways that people have done it that's worked out really well is somebody says, during this period of time, I want to make sure we monitor these 5 or 6 points. Well, those 5 or 6 points now become a dashboard that everybody gets and everybody's talking about in each meeting. So where are we here? Where are we at with our numbers? Where are we at with our finances? Now, again, every meeting is talking about it, but now you might dig down into a deeper level than you've ever have dug down before. It still doesn't mean that you can go over the boundaries of what should a board do versus staff. You might want to make sure you still keep those lines, but also be available, be around, but also know what systems, how are you going to make these decisions? How are you going to evaluate them in a way that puts and positions your organization in a way that allows you to move the organization forward and continually support each other through strong communication, right, an investigation, and then lastly also as activation. So how do we go about doing that? So the last thing I always wanted to do is reflections, is really looking at this is, what did you learn? What did you unlearn? What did or can you apply? Those are reflection questions that I use to start every class that I ever teach at the university. And it just allows, I believe reflection is a leadership principle. So what are we learning through this? What did we have to unlearn in order to be, and then what did or can we continue still to apply? So that's the end of the portion of it. I just wanted to make sure that we went through, but I will allow our opportunity now to just kind of take some questions and really talk about what's working well in some organizations and how we can assist.
Okay, so Lynn, we just asked in the chat box if anybody had any questions. We don't have any that are waiting for you. So if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask Lynn, this is the time. You can put those in the Q&A box.
Yeah, one question I know that that has come up often was in relation to the type of meetings that we're having and the board meetings, the type that we're really looking at, and committee work. And I do think one of the roles of the chair also is to ensure that some of this stuff moves forward. But I do think that those meetings, particularly some of the finance committees, the committee meetings, they're still moving forward. The structure is what continue to get you there. Without pulling away a piece of that structure, sometimes it hurts the organization's structure. So Janine, I saw something pop up.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think we have two, and the first one is, as a board chair, what are some ways to activate other board members during this time when everyone is so stressed?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's incredible that you recognized, yes, during the time, everybody is stressed. Everybody's kind of like going through things. The thing about it is that often at times, 20% of the people that we surveyed said that they felt like their boards were not as supportive of the nonprofit during this time already. First of all, 20% is, I believe, still a low number. The other thing that I attribute that to often at times is not knowing what to do, right? People don't know what to do because this is unprecedented. So I think that how do I activate board members is that if I was a chair, I'd start thinking about it. Me, of course, is going to be from a strengths-based perspective. Hey, where are this person's strengths, right? So I can't tell all the board members, we need to fundraise. And I know half of them don't want to fundraise or don't like fundraising. Will I get some to? Yes, but where are some other things that I can allow their strengths to be used? Is that through phone calls? Is that just through thank yous? Is that just talking to, letters to different groups or letters to staff, just letting them know that we're there for them, we're thinking about it. So how do I activate it? It is by figuring out what is it specifically that I want from them? What are our specific needs for the organization? As a chair and an ED, making sure that I'm clear on what that is so that I'm not just giving people more work or giving the staff more work to do, but we're figuring out how we can help. And that communication is going to be key. And it changes. Keep in mind, it changes from day to day. I remember when this first happened, it was my son's school said, well, we're going to stay open. And I got the email. I got the letter. It was a 2-page letter, nicely written, and why they were going to stay open. And it came at 8:00 p.m. 9 a.m. next morning says we're shutting down, right? So it probably took them enough time to write the letter than it did for this to come back. So thinking about how do we communicate in a way to really allow people to understand what we're truly going through. It's a good question.
And Barbara, I would just answer also, because we are in this series really focused on personal well-being. As a board chair or as any board member, if you haven't personally reached out to your executive director yet, please do so. They're feeling a lot of stress, and you'd be surprised how many of them have not been in contact with their board chair or other board members, just simply to have a conversation. How are you doing? Is there anything I can do to help you? So I want to throw that out with some encouragement that if you are in a board role, that you reach out to your nonprofit leaders. And
Janine, I would also say with that, also reaching out to other board members, of course, just checking in with them and what their availability is and what they're going through. And then from a board chair, there's also other board chairs that are going through certain things like this also that you may know. And this is an opportunity for you to bond with someone else also, because just as much as the CEO role sometimes is a lonely position because of what they're have to do, because between board and some staff members, sometimes that the board chair role is a lonely role as well, because they're trying to be this in between. So reaching out to other people for support as well.
So Lynn, we have another question. How do you recommend developing a partnership or even a merger while we are socially isolated, especially if it relates to a facility or way of delivering a program that would require site visits?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting when the group told me that. First of all, another good question. When the group told me that, I was surprised, because you're right, it does require a little bit more. But what I was impressed by is the fact that they were thinking about it, right? So the point is that often at times when people know who's doing this same work, and a lot of times it doesn't mean that it's an official merger as much as it's more of a, hey, how do we help still tackle this population together? What can we do right now? I want to say 2008, that was the biggest time that I've ever seen people come together and collaborate, right? This is the time where people are coming together saying, how can we do this work? As funding was coming down the pike, it was always, how can we do this together? What can we do? Because we're bringing some resources together. As far as the physical part of it, you're right, that's going to be a challenge in this day and age. It's really more about the establishing what it is that we seek, what are the possibilities out there. And it may be possible that we're going to do something more. It may not be possible we're going to do something less. But I think it's wise to reach out to other stakeholders who are doing this work without thinking about the end game as yet, but having the conversation, having the dialogue. And there's a lot of resources that help people think this through a little bit more. We'll provide some of those to you, and we send out when the slides are tied to this, but just other resources that can help you think through this and more questions to ask. Very good question.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lynn. We have another question. It's a little bit long. So I'm an ED for a small nonprofit, and I'm the only paid employee. Now that we are at a standstill, and basically the only money coming out of our budget is for my salary. We have about a year before that money runs out. Many of our donors have dried up. With everything going on, should I consider coming off staff to save those funds for when things do get, quote unquote, back to normal?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, right? You're really trying to look at what's your strategy and how are you going to do this process and move it forward. I have seen, even at the university, I have seen that some of the leaders have taken a 15% pay cut during this time to make sure that they're thinking about the funds and the resources that we currently have. I can never recommend that someone completely give up their resources, because they deserve them and they're working hard for it. I'm an advocate of executive directors who are really putting everything that they have out there and putting it all on the line. So I would say that, yes, you should look at figuring out what are some ways that we can make sure we can conserve our funds. And I'm impressed that you have a year. A lot of times the operating, in San Diego County, most people only have about 1.5 months of reserves on hand. So the fact that you have a year for staffing it helps out tremendously. I would also try and look at this and forecast, if things were going to happen, what would 6 months look like? At what point do I need to rethink my decision? 3 months from now, 4 months from now, or what are the criteria I'm going to use to make that decision? Now, as far as funding drying up, we have to ask ourselves, what's the opportunity here? Is the opportunity for me to, identify other funders? Is there an opportunity for me to look at spend more time in the individual giving? We do know across the board everybody's impacted by this, but we also know that there are opportunities for funding that we may or may not be aware of. And some of that is the federal funding, and they do have some money still remaining in the PPP. So there's ways where you can look at that resource, but there's other opportunities also. But you're right, the funders are, it's hard, but I do want to say that there are a lot of funders also saying, how can we help?
The person who asked the question said thank you.
No, I can only see the flashing light that says that there's a question.
Yeah, let's see. Given that most nonprofits have almost no margin for error, i.e. cash, even in normal times, quote unquote, magical thinking can often be fatal. Being nimble in a fast moving crisis is critical. What recommendations do you have for board chairs to impress upon the broader set of trustees that their time and money is more important now than ever? How can boards avoid the traps of magical thinking?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it goes back to my point of identifying and figuring out where are you right now, right? Where are you as an organization right now? What are your abilities right now? So people say, hey, we're gonna make sure that every person has food for dinner every night, and then there's only 2 of us on the organization, right? What is realistic from your organization? What criteria are you going to use? Giving the board good data so that they're clear on that. If we know that they're thinking a certain way, and if we know that our dashboard, if we have a dashboard that continues all of these things that we track, maybe that we make it a little bit more concise so people are seeing what they really need to do to not have their Merlin the Magician hat on, but also put on their strategy hat, right? The other thing is that I ask people to think about it in 3 ways. So think about it with these 3 steps. So the first one is that what are we trying to accomplish, right? What is the problem? What are we trying to accomplish? The second part is that we're asking ourselves, what are our core values, and how do we accomplish what we want, keeping our core values in line? And if our core values are the treatment and the care of people, making sure that is kept in mind, and are we doing that? The next one is asking ourselves, what assets do we currently have in order for us to help accomplish this task, right? So often at times people will say, oh, we're gonna get this done. And they're like, who's gonna do it? We're talking about board members, and we forget that our assets are out there, that somebody's already doing this, or somebody has that. But once we came up with the idea, we limited our thinking about the people in the room, right? So figuring out who else needs to be in the room at what time, right? So we're asking ourselves, what are we trying to accomplish? The second thing that we're saying is that what are our core values? How does it stay in line with that? What exactly are our assets? If you answer those 3 questions, the 4th one comes into play, and then you can make a decision and move people forward. I want people making decisions and thinking about what is going to be a magical with looking at my data, or looking at what are our assets? What are the challenges that we might face? Getting all of that stuff together. But you see, once you do that process, it'll kind of move forward in a different way because it was driven by data. And again, some of the analysis, even your SWOT analysis or your pest analysis, some of those things can be redone to kind of like help you right now. The limited resources is real. If we told an organization that organizations report to us in good times that they have about 1.5 months of reserves online, it's already been 1.5 months, right? So people are already exhausted their reserves, and that is real. And I don't want to discount that the cash and having the direct payment is extremely important for people. But I also want to say is that, and it's not really a but, it's like I also want to say is that with that in mind, we have to figure out what do we do. And a start is by bringing trust together, bringing people together, bringing the outside people in, and identifying a strategy that you're going to follow. There's a couple of models out there, like John Cotter's the Heart of Change. How do we do change? And it's looking at what these change principles are. These change principles work outside of a pandemic, but also they work inside of it, right? What are our models that we're going to use to really make sure that we're making the right decisions and we're moving a process forward in a way that not only makes us as an organization healthy and happier, but also to make sure that we feel good because 1, we were there for our people at the right time. 2, we feel like the resources were allocated in the right way. And 3, it aligned with our core values and who we are as a people. Those are good,
Great.
really
Thank
good
you,
questions.
Lynn. This is the last call for questions. If you have a question, you can either put it in chat or in the Q&A box. So while we're waiting to see if anybody has any other questions, let me thank you for joining us today. Let me thank you, Lynn, very much for your expertise and your time with us today. And I'll remind you and invite you to our webinar on Friday with Dr. Zachary Green on personal and professional resiliency. And that will be Friday from 12 to 1 as well. So it doesn't look like we have any other questions. Lynn, did you have any closing remarks that you wanted to share with the group?
You know, we have a governance symposium once a year, and I get to see a lot of people. We have over, 300 people that show up for that. I believe governance is year round. You know, I do think that we should be thinking about it that way. I think this is a good time for people to review their bylaws when they start having time that comes out of this. That's of course done through the governance committee. The question that came up before was how should we were in the middle of recruiting and bringing people on. Should we continue to do that? The answer is that if you've identified somebody to help you through that, yes, why not? And people are like, well, I'd rather them come on during times that where, everything's fine. People are here to help, and you need the help. Take advantage of that, particularly if you were researching it already. As you know, with any big pandemic, 9/11, anything that happens, people are more likely to want to volunteer and more likely to want to give. You just have to make the case for it.
All right. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we will see you on Friday.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right. You too. Bye now.